Hello everyone, this is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team to reduce the potential for fraud, compliance fines, and just overall bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. So what do you do if it's getting down to the wire to be in compliance with the IRS deadlines for sending vendors their 1099 NEC or 1099 MISC or filing both with the IRS? And you know that you are going to be late. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 372, Running Late on 1099 NEC or 1099 MISC reporting. File these IRS extensions to prevent penalties. So if you've listened to some of my episodes in the past, you may already know that I used to be a practitioner. I was an AP senior manager over global vendor setup and maintenance. And I talk about the fact that we used to have 140,000 active vendors across 7 different ERPs. And that really translated or converted to about 24,000 to 30,000 1099s and 1042s that we would issue or generate every year. So we would generate the recipient statements and send those to the vendors. And then we would use or file with the IRS. And at that time, we used the FIRE system, which is still available this tax year for this tax year 2025. But we use the FIRE system to report that same income, those same statements to the IRS. But what do you do if you're right down to the wire and something goes wrong and you're not able to get them out? And the reason that I say it that way is because we used to produce or generate all of those forms in-house. And so we would have to find multifunction printers, like every one that we could find. We would have to schedule times to be there. So we didn't have people, sending things to the printer that's going to print on the 1099 forms that we had. We even had issues with staff putting the forms in the printer upside down. So now you not only wasted all those forms, but now you have to take the time to reprint them all. And so between those types of issues, and sometimes we would have system issues where we couldn't get the tax reporting information out of one of those 7 systems because, one of them or multi actually were from a lift and shift when there was an acquisition. And so we just brought over their system, and that that definitely caused some problems. And so there are quite a few things that could cause you to be running late. Oh, and another one. Now, this one wasn't just running late. This was just no one did it. And this happened before my time, but I definitely had to deal with the fallout. But one of the staff was out because a family member was sick, and that staff that was out thought that when they discussed it, the person that was left behind would do the, tax reporting, send the recipient statements, and then also the filing with the IRS. And the employee that was left behind thought that the understanding was that when the employee that would come back after dealing with the family member that had the health issue, that they would then send the recipient statements and file with the IRS. So as a result, nothing got done. So you definitely don't want to be in that position. But also, if you are, especially if you're listening to this podcast the day of I'm publishing it, which is Thursday, January 29th, or any time, right, between then and when they are due, January, or not January, because January 31st is a Saturday. And so the next business day is Monday, February 2nd. And so for those that are due on the 2nd, right, so anywhere between then and the 2nd, something can go wrong. And so I thought I would go ahead and do this quick episode on the forms that can provide extensions to send the recipient statements to your vendors and extension to file with the IRS. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And I am going to start with the deadline dates. So you know what the deadline dates are for the 1099 NEC and the 1099 MISC. So let's start with the 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation. And the deadline date for this one is very easy because it is Monday, February 2nd, 2026. Again, because January 31st, which is typically the day, which is always the day, except when it's on a holiday or a weekend, you always use the next business day, which is Monday, February 2nd. So you have to have the recipient statements to your vendors by Monday, February 2nd. You also, whether you are filing IRS paper or electronic, you have to have that filing to the IRS the same day by Monday, February 2nd. Now, the dates for the 1099 MISC is the recipient statement. So the, forms to your vendors, those are also due Monday, February 2nd. However, for boxes 8 or 10 only, you can extend that out through Tuesday, February 17th. And again, you have an extended period because typically box 8 and 10 for the 1099 MISC, it's always due like February 15th. But February 15th is on a Sunday, and February 16th, that Monday, is President's Day. So it's a holiday. So the deadline goes to the next business day, which is Tuesday, February 17th. But I will tell you, you may do this, but we never did when I was generating all those 1099 MISC. You can separate, right, and do them separately because it definitely gives you more days. But for us, it was not very easy to separate, the printing of the forms based on box. We just did them all at the same time. And you may do the same thing, so you can send them early. We just sent all the 1099 MISC that were needed to be sent out to the vendors, needed to be reported to the IRS. We did them all at the same time. And so if we were doing it today, all boxes of the 1099 MISC would be sent to the vendors Monday, February 2nd, and then would be reported together to the IRS. And that makes sense because because the 1099 MISC, unlike the 1099 NEC, where, sending it to your vendors and reporting to the IRS, whether paper or electronic, they're all the same day, but it's not the same way with the 1099 MISC. And so sending them to your vendors, we just talked about those days, but reporting it to the IRS, if you are lucky enough to still be able to report via paper, that is Monday, March 2nd, and that is because February 28th, the typical or normal day, is a Saturday. Now, if you're filing with the IRS electronically, then the due date for the 1099 MISC is Tuesday, March 31st. So we've got some varying dates with the 1099 MISC, but the 1099 NEC, right, and the MISC, let's put it this way, the 1099 NEC that's due to the uh, vendors and the filing due to IRS, and the 1099 MISC that is due to the vendors, right, all have that February 2nd date. And so let's talk about then the extension forms. Again, if you're listening to this podcast for tax year 2025, tax filing season 2026, those are your dates. And if you know that it's getting close and you won't be ready, this is the podcast for you. I will tell you though, if you're listening to this in a future year, you can just substitute the dates for that particular tax year. And as long as nothing has changed, right, these would be the forms that you would use. And if the forms for whatever reason do change, then I will definitely put another podcast episode out there. So wherever you're listening to my podcast, you can put extensions in the search tool and it will come up with the most recent version. But for tax year 2025, those are the filing dates. And now let's look at talk about the extensions for the 1099 NEC and 1099 MISC for both recipient forms or statements to the vendors and tax filing to the IRS. I do want to touch really quick on the IRS penalty chart, and I'll put a link to that IRS page in the show notes because this is the whole reason you're filing the extensions. You do not want to be assessed penalties by the IRS because you did not file with the IRS in time, or you filed, you can also get penalties if you filed incorrect information. But you also get a separate penalty for that same vendor income that you're reporting if you didn't provide the recipient statements to the vendors on time either. So if you need an extension and you don't file and you end up filing late with the IRS and sending the vendor their statements late, you get a double. I mean, that's like getting a double penalty because the IRS will assess separate penalties for each non-event, I guess is what you can say, for not doing either one of those. All right, so again, I will put a link to the IRS penalty chart, and the penalty chart, by the way, has the penalties on it and is all based on when the correction is made or when you send them out, like how late they are. It's all based on how late it's being done. 30 days, 31 days through August 1st, after August 1st. They also have an intentional disregard. So you got to keep that in mind too. All right. So let's talk about the extension of time form for filing the 1099s with the IRS. So this is the part where you have to file with them. Now, the form that you need to fill out is Form 8809, the application for extension of time to file information returns. And I'll put a link to this form in the show notes. The great news is that it is an automatic 30-day extension. It does not, however, extend the time for any tax due. And I also want to point out that you've got a little bit of different criteria that's required for the 1099 NEC, and you have to look at box 7 or question 7 because it's asking that if you are requesting an extension for either forms W-2 or 1099 NEC, or if you check the box on line 5, which says that if you already requested an automatic extension, you have to check that box, then you have to meet the criteria that is in this little section. And they give you 1, 2, 3, 4. You are supposed to check the applicable boxes that describes your need for an extension. And so there are 5 different scenarios. One is, if there was a fire, casualty, or natural disaster. Another one is death, serious illness, or unavoidable absence of the individual responsible for filing the information returns. Um, the other one or another one is the filer was in the first year of establishment, or the filer did not receive the data, and it kind of goes on to describe that. And I didn't read the first one. It is the filer suffered a catastrophic event in a federally declared disaster area. And so I just kind of read a little bit of each of the 5 different reasons or criteria that you have to check one or more boxes if you are requesting an extension to file the 1099 NEC, but you don't have to do that if you are using this form to request an extension for the 1099 MISC only. Another thing about this form is that you can file it via paper or you can file it in IRS or the fire system, at least as long as the fire system is around. And it is still available to e-file for tax year 2025 and tax filing season 2026. But if you are requesting an extension on for the 1099 NEC, that must be filed via paper. All right, now I already said that you get an automatic 30-day extension, but if you need another extension, you do have to check that box in this form. I did point that out earlier, but they do indicate here that the second extension is much harder to get. And the due date for the Form 8809 is no later than the due date of the returns when those are due. So it can go anywhere. They start from January 1st, but no later than the due date of the returns to the IRS. All right, so that was the Form 8809 if you need an extension of time to file tax reporting with the IRS for the 1099 NEC, 1099 MISC. Now, if you also need an extension of time to send those recipient statements, 1099 NEC, 1099 MISC forms to your vendors, there is an extension of time form for that. Now, this is a fairly new form. I think it's only been around like less than 3 years. It's Form 15397, the application for extension of time to furnish recipient statements. Now, it does provide a one-time 30-day extension, and it is due no later than the date the forms are due to the vendors. Now, to submit the form, you will submit this form online. There is a mobile-friendly version of the form where you can submit it online, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. You can still, however, request it the old way by sending a letter to the IRS via a fax number. And so you can do it that way, or you can file this form 15397. And again, it does cover the 1099 MISC, the 1099 NEC. All right, so those are the forms that you can file with the IRS if you know that you are running late and you want to avoid those penalties being assessed. If you know that you can't get the 1099 MISC, the 1099 NEC to your vendors in time, and or if you know that you are not going to be able to file with the IRS those same 1099 MISC, same 1099 NECs, right to them on time. So you have to do both on time, sending that form to your vendors, sending the applicable forms to your vendors, and then doing the related tax filing to the IRS. If you know you're going to be late, file the extension of time form to give you an additional 30 days and avoid the penalties if you don't do it. All right, so that is it for today. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 332nd episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.